This place isn't abandoned, it's waiting. The front door groaned open like something waking from a long, bitter sleep. Elias Grant stepped into the dim foyer of St. Eliza's orphan asylum, the floorboards beneath his boots creaking as if warning him to turn back. His fingers still clutched the deed, its official seal half smudged from sweat. Arizona heat clung to his collar, but inside the orphanage the air was cold, unnaturally so. The kind of cold that didn't come from temperature but from memory, from absence. His eyes adjusted to the dark. 43 pairs of children's shoes were neatly lined up by the wall. Some were scuffed work boots, others dainty lace-ups too small for anything older than 6. All of them were polished, spotless, as if someone had just finished cleaning them. That was the first lie. This place had supposedly been empty for 20 years. Deserted. Sold cheap by a property firm in Tucson, looking to offload a worthless ruin. But what kind of ruin smelled like fresh bread? What kind of ruin had furniture-shaped patterns in the dust? Elias stepped further inside. His boots left clean tracks on the dusty floor, and his eyes drifted toward the grand staircase ahead, once majestic, now sagging under the weight of time. Cobwebs clung to the corners like aging ghosts. But there was no rot, no mold, no signs of decay. St. Eliza's hadn't been abandoned. It had been paused. He passed the row of shoes, heart thudding faster now. His plan had been simple: convert the old orphanage into a boutique hotel. He'd bought the land for next to nothing. The locals in Sundown County hadn't protested. In fact, most were relieved. Finally getting rid of that place, they said. But no one explained why it needed to be gotten rid of. Now he was starting to understand. The main office sat just beyond the hallway, one door hanging off its hinges. Elias nudged it open and stepped inside. The desk was coated in a thin layer of dust, but it had clearly been used recently. On top of it sat a leather-bound ledger open to a page written in careful, slanted handwriting. The date was only 3 months ago. Final transfer complete. All records relocated. May they forgive us for what we had to do. Elias exhaled slowly. He glanced around the office, then back at the door, half expecting someone to step into the frame. But no one came. He leaned over the ledger, flipping to the previous entries. All official documents said the orphanage closed in 1856 after a fire on the 3rd floor. But these entries told another story, one that continued long after the supposed closure. Names, shipments, transfers, locations. But something about the ink didn't sit right. He lifted the page toward the dusty light streaming through the cracked blinds. Beneath the surface of the paper, he saw faint indented words, written with such pressure that they'd left ghostly imprints through several pages. He tilted the paper, squinted. Separated from brother. False name given. Payment received. His stomach dropped. The sound of wind scraped along the window panes, dry and scraping like sandpaper. Elias rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly aware of how alone he was. No, not alone. There was something else here. Something that had waited too long. He pushed back from the desk, eyes catching a glint under the corner drawer. He crouched down and tugged until it slid loose. Wedged deep in the back, he found a crumpled piece of parchment. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. They are taking the children west, not to families, to work. The buyers pay more for the young ones who won't ask about their names. I tried to stop it. But I'm just one man. If someone finds this, know that we kept their real names. The truth is hidden where only the children could reach. C.B. Elias's throat tightened. The initials. Caleb Boone. He had seen the name once in an old article long before he ever came to Sundown County. Caleb Boone, groundskeeper at St. Eliza's until its closure. Rumors said he disappeared the same year the fire was reported. He wasn't gone. He had stayed. He had written. Elias pocketed the note and stepped out of the office. Every creak beneath his boots sounded louder now, like footsteps following. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. He walked past the dormitory hallway, door after door opening to rows of empty bunks perfectly aligned, until one mattress wasn't quite flat. He lifted it. Beneath it, folded with childlike care, was a piece of paper, a drawing. Two stick figures holding hands, one taller, one smaller. And beneath them, written in pencil, was a jagged, unsteady scrawl. "Find my sister Mary." Elias sat down hard on the bed frame. This wasn't a haunted house. It was a crime scene, and someone had made sure it was forgotten. He stood and looked around again, as if seeing everything for the first time. The scratch marks at the door frames at child height. The windows nailed shut from the outside. The kitchen was stocked with huge serving pots, but only a dozen eating utensils. 43 pairs of shoes, only 13 spoons. The math didn't add up. He returned to the hallway, drawn back toward the ledger. But this time his fingers followed the baseboards, just like the note had suggested, where only the children could reach. And in the far corner of the office, just behind the desk, he felt a slight give in the wood. A section of paneling shifted under pressure. Elias dug his nails into the edge and pulled until it popped free. Behind it, nestled in darkness, was a small metal box. He reached for it, heart pounding. The metal was cold in his hands, even in the desert heat. He had just lifted the box out when the front door creaked open. Footsteps. Slow. Familiar. Confidence. Not lost. Not wandering. Returning. Elias shoved the box into his coat and clicked the panel back into place just as the steps reached the office door. A voice spoke sharp and certain from just beyond the frame. "This building's been closed for 20 years. You have no right to be here." He turned. Standing in the doorway was a woman in a faded black dress, posture ramrod straight, eyes the color of ice. Her face was angular, controlled, but there was something colder behind it, something calculated. "I'm Elias Grant," he said. "I just bought this property." The woman stepped forward without hesitation. "My name," she said, "is Miriam Ashcroft, and if you know what's good for you, Mr. Grant, you'll leave before you dig too deep." Continues as Elias defies the warning ventures deeper into St. Eliza's and uncovers the first evidence of trafficking boxes labeled with numbers, not names. "This place has secrets buried in the floor," Elias said under his breath, as Miriam Ashcroft's heels clicked away down the front steps of the orphanage. She hadn't stayed long, just enough time to remind him she still thought she ran the place. She hadn't even looked back after her thinly veiled warning. He watched from the window until her silhouette disappeared into the copper-red dusk swallowed by dust and memory. Then he locked the front door behind her. The metal box hidden inside his coat felt heavier with every passing second. He returned to the main office, heart still thudding with residual tension. She hadn't seen the box, hadn't noticed the missing panel. Not yet. But if she came back, and she would, he needed to know what was inside before she had a chance to take it from him. Elias slid the box onto the desk and opened the rusted latch. Inside was a stack of photographs wrapped in oilcloth yellowed papers bound in twine, and a small leather journal that smelled of smoke and damp cedar. The initials CB were embossed on the spine. Caleb Boone. Elias flipped the journal open to a page marked with a red ribbon. The disappeared. Dozens of names, ages, dates, scrawled in a precise, almost obsessive hand, and next to each name a location. Silver Creek Excavation, Copper Canyon Mine, Ridge Shaft 14. He turned the page. More names, more mines. Some with small notes beside them: tunnel collapsed, child presumed dead. Refused to answer the new name. Transferred east. Unfit for labor. His stomach churned. These weren't adoption placements. These were shipments. He picked up one of the photos. A boy no older than 8 sat on a wooden crate, arms wrapped around his knees. Dirt on his face. Something hollow in his eyes. On the back of the photo, in faded pencil, 302 sent to Red Hollow. Didn't survive the first collapse. The ledger, the drawings, the note hidden in the drawer. It was all real. The building creaked around him, wood settling, as if the walls themselves were sighing with the weight of truth. Elias stood, journal in hand, and moved quickly down the hall toward the west wing of the dormitories. He needed to see it all. Understand it. Each room was neatly arranged. Bunk beds stripped to the frame. No personal items. No blankets. Just order. Clinical, sterile order. But in the third room from the end, the floor groaned differently under his boot. He paused. Shifted his weight. Hollow. He knelt, running his fingers over the wooden floorboards, until he found one that felt loose at the edge. With effort, he pried it up, revealing a shallow cavity beneath. Tucked inside was a small bundle wrapped in wax paper. A crayon drawing rested on top, 2 stick figures holding hands. The word Mary is written in looping, childlike script. Beneath the drawing, small trinkets. A carved wooden horse, a lace ribbon, a broken tin whistle. Someone's treasures hidden in a place no one was supposed to look. He sat back on his heels. His chest ached with something sharp and helpless. This place hadn't been a home. It had been a machine. A factory that processed the forgotten into silence. He made his way to the basement, flicking on the dim bulb at the top of the stairs. The light buzzed, casting jagged shadows down the narrow staircase. The air shifted the moment he crossed the threshold. It smelled like cardboard rust and something faintly sweet, rotting memories soaked into stone. Wooden shelves lined the walls, box after box labeled in handwritten numbers. No names, just digits. 113, 257, 301, 847. He chose one at random and pulled it from the shelf. Inside, a faded girl's dress, small boots, and a tag that read, Age 7. Brown hair. Quiet. Suitable for Western placement. That word again. Placement. Not adoption. Not fostering. Placement. Like cargo. He reached for another. Box 655. A boy's cap. A church bulletin with a circled name, James A. Carver. A note stapled to the corner, behavioral issues. Recommend labor-intensive relocation. He couldn't breathe. He set the box back, his hands trembling. This wasn't an orphanage, he whispered. It was a marketplace, kept records of every sale. He returned to the journal. Some entries included dollar amounts. Others simply read, transferred without payment, part of the shipment bundle. A horrifying picture formed in his mind. These children hadn't just been abandoned by the world. They'd been harvested by it. He scanned the walls, heart racing faster now. If Miriam came back, if anyone came back, he needed leverage. Proof. He found a second shelf behind a curtain of mildewed canvas. These boxes were different, some newer, some marked with red tape. One stood out. Box 9117, hold. Inside he found a map. It was hand-drawn in blue ink with coded markers and a legend of symbols. Small X's denoted known grave sites. Circles marked unverified. There were 37 marks total, each one labeled, each one corresponding to a name in Caleb's journal. He touched the paper as if to steady himself. Then suddenly a sound upstairs, the front door creaking open. He froze. Footsteps. But these weren't Miriam's sharp heels. These were boots. Heavier, slower, measured. He backed into the shadows, every instinct screaming to hide the journal, the photos, the map. Then a voice, low, male, calm, in a way that terrified him more than shouting. Elias Grant, the man called. Elias didn't answer. I know you're here, the voice continued. You left the front gate open. Rookie mistake. A shadow passed the basement door. The handle jiggled, then stopped. Silence. Then the man spoke again. This time closer. You found something you weren't supposed to, didn't you? Elias clutched the map, heart racing. They weren't just trying to hide the past. They were still running the operation. The voice came again, softer now. Why don't you come up, Mr. Grant? Let's talk, before someone else gets hurt. Elias meets Clara Whitmore, a survivor who returns to finish what she started and reveal Miriam Ashcroft's darkest secret. Some doors don't stay closed just because you locked them. The voice echoed softly inside Elias's head as he pressed his back against the cold wall of the basement. The man upstairs, whoever he was, had moved with too much familiarity as if he knew the building by heart. Elias held his breath, fingers tight around the folded map in his coat pocket. The basement door creaked again, but this time the footsteps retreated. A long silence followed. Then the front door slammed. He waited a full minute before moving. When he finally climbed the stairs, the foyer was empty, but not untouched. A chair had been dragged an inch out of place. The front door was slightly ajar, and the faint smell of cigar smoke clung to the air like a fingerprint. Someone had come to warn him or threaten him, and they didn't need to break a lock to get in. Elias shut the door quietly and slipped the bolt into place. He wasn't sure if it made any difference. The whole damn building felt like a sieve. Secrets leaked through every wall. He set the map and Caleb's journal on the office desk, then pulled the metal box closer. It wasn't just evidence now. It was the only shield he had against whatever was closing in on him. He flipped through the journal again. Pages upon pages of tight handwriting notes that looked less like a caretaker's records and more like confessions. Some were dated decades ago. Others, I am only a few years old. Caleb Boone hadn't just kept track of the children. He'd documented the deals, the buyers, even the roots. The sound of boots on the porch snapped him upright. Elias slid the journal back into the box and pressed the false wall panel shut, just as the front door creaked open a second time. Mr. Grant, a familiar voice called. You're still here. Miriam Ashcroft stepped inside her figure, framed by the dull light of early nightfall. She wasn't alone. A man lingered just behind her on the porch, tall, broad-shouldered with a Stetson low over his brow. But she waved him off and closed the door herself. Couldn't sleep, Elias said evenly. Big property. A lot to assess. She gave him a long, calculated look, and a lot to get lost in. Her tone was mild, but there was a knife hidden in it. She walked slowly toward the office, fingers grazing the walls as she went. Her eyes moved the way a predator scans a clearing, methodically, patiently. "Did I frighten you earlier?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. "This building can be unsettling at night." "I'm not easily frightened," Elias lied. She smiled without warmth. "Of course not. Men who come here usually aren't." The way she said "men who come here" made his chest tighten. He opened his mouth ready to ask what she meant, but a sharp knock interrupted them. 3 hard raps on the door. Miriam's head snapped toward the sound, and for the first time Elias saw something flicker across her face. Not fear. Annoyance. She opened the door with a sharp tug. A woman stood on the porch, her boots coated in desert dust, braid loose around her shoulders. She was in her 30s, with the kind of posture that belonged to someone who'd spent a lifetime bracing against the world. Her eyes landed on Miriam like a blade. "Miriam," she said, "I see you're still guarding Hell's front gate." Miriam stiffened. "Clara." Clara Whitmore's gaze shifted to Elias, assessing him quickly before returning to Miriam. "Who's this another buyer or another fool you plan to feed to your lies?" Elias stepped forward. "Elias Grant. I own the property." Clara's laugh was short, humorless. "Then you just bought yourself a graveyard." Miriam exhaled sharply. "You shouldn't be here." "No," Clara said, brushing past her. "You shouldn't." The room suddenly felt smaller with the 2 women in it. There was history between them, thick, bitter history. Elias could feel it like heat radiating off a stove. "I grew up here," Clara said, turning slowly in the foyer, looking at the walls as if peeling back old skin. "Right here. 3rd dormitory, top bunk. 7 years old when you sold me to a family in Nevada and told them I was an orphan." Miriam's jaw tightened. "You were an orphan?" "No," Clara hissed, stepping closer. "My parents were alive. They spent 15 years searching for me. They died never knowing I'd been auctioned off like livestock." Elias felt a strange weight settle into his chest. He hadn't known what to expect when he bought this place, but it sure as hell wasn't this. Clara turned toward him, eyes steady. "You've already found the ledger, haven't you?" He blinked. "What?" She smiled, tired, grim. "The ledger. The basement boxes. Caleb Boone's handwriting. I can tell by your face, people who don't know don't look like that." Elias's throat went dry. "How do you—" "Because I've been here before," she said, voice softening for the first time. "More times than I care to remember. I've spent years digging for the truth Miriam tried to bury." Miriam took a step forward. "This is dangerous, Clara. For everyone." Clara ignored her. "For children, Miriam." It was dangerous for children. The air went razor sharp. Miriam's knuckles whitened at her sides, but she didn't lash back. Not yet. Elias swallowed and asked the only question that made sense. "Who's Caleb Boone?" Silence. Then Clara's voice, steady as bone. "The man who couldn't save us." So he wrote it all down instead. She walked toward the office desk, stopping at the exact spot where Elias had pulled the panel free hours earlier. She crouched, touched the molding with practiced hands, and smiled without joy. "He told me once," she whispered, "if no one will listen to the living, they'll have to listen to the dead." She pried the panel loose with ease. Miriam didn't move. Her stillness was louder than any scream. Clara looked up at Elias. "You found it." He nodded slowly. Clara lifted the box, brushed dust off the lid, and opened it. This, she said, pulling out Caleb's journal, is why she's afraid. Miriam finally spoke. He was a broken man. What he wrote means nothing. It means everything, Clara shot back, because it's the only truth anyone ever left behind. Elias stared at the pages in Clara's hands, the same names, dates, and grave markers he'd seen earlier. But in her voice, they sounded heavier. Realer. He kept every name, Clara said, softer now. Every number. Every child who disappeared. He did it because no one else would. Miriam's face hardened. You can't prove anything. Clara smirked. I already have. For the first time, Miriam looked unsettled. Her hands clenched together, not from rage, but calculation. Elias stepped forward. You two need to tell me exactly what happened here. Miriam's cold eyes flicked to him. No, Mr. Grant. You need to stop asking questions. She turned sharply, heading for the door. Where are you going? Elias called after her. Some doors, she said, without turning back, should have stayed locked. The door slammed. The silence left behind was thick as smoke. Clara exhaled slowly and sat down, placing Caleb's journal gently on the desk. You've stepped into something much bigger than a real estate deal. Elias ran a hand over his face. I'm starting to realize that. She nodded toward the basement. He left more than a journal down there. There's a map. There are names. And there's proof this operation didn't die when the orphanage closed. It just changed faces. Elias frowned. What do you mean? She met his eyes, steady and grim. I mean, they're still moving children. They never stopped. Elias felt something cold settle into his bones. This wasn't a mystery frozen in the past. It was still alive. Clara and Elias search Caleb Boone's files and discover the first undeniable proof linking the orphanage to forced labor camps and a map that will lead them to the truth. She sold me like livestock and smiled while doing it. Clara's voice hung in the room like smoke. Elias didn't move. He just stood there, watching her fingers trace the worn edges of Caleb Boone's journal, with something between reverence and fury. She had lived this. He was only just arriving. The wind outside howled low through the cracked window frames, but neither of them acknowledged it. The house had fallen into a stillness, again expectant listening. Clara closed the journal carefully, then turned to Elias. Her gaze was sharper now, like someone measuring whether to trust or to walk away. You really didn't know, she said. Elias shook his head. Not until yesterday. I thought this place was just another broken-down building with a bad reputation. Cheap land, solid bones, good location. That's all I was told. Clara gave a bitter laugh. That's how they always sell it. Solid bones, huh? You know what else has solid bones? Graves. She walked toward the wall, brushing aside the threadbare curtain that covered a tall cabinet. Behind it, tucked between old ledgers and a stack of mildewed hymnals, was a slim, weathered folder. She opened it and laid the contents on the desk. Photographs, documents, letters. Elias leaned in. One of the photographs showed a group of children, maybe 15 of them, lined up in front of a wagon. Most of them stared blankly into the camera. A few tried to smile. Their clothes were mismatched, dusty. On the back of the photo, someone had written Red Hollow Transport, May 1862. They called it relocation, Clara said, her voice tight. Said we were lucky. Said we'd have new homes, new families, warm beds. She tapped a second document, a handwritten invoice with faded ink, sieved $20 per head. No refunds. No names recorded. Initials. M.A. Miriam Ashcroft, Elias said quietly. Clara nodded. She ran it like a business. Clean on the outside. Pious. Charitable. But underneath, it was trafficking. Elias took a step back from the desk. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. How many kids, Clara? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled another piece of paper from the folder and held it up. A ledger page, not the one from the main desk, but a photocopy of one Caleb had hidden. The numbers were chilling. Shipment totals, locations, ages. At the bottom of the page, children moved 312, confirmed survivors 41, unaccounted for 21. Elias ran a hand through his hair. Jesus. No, Clara said. Jesus had nothing to do with this. He looked at her, then really looked. She was worn, yes, weathered from years of digging up bones no one wanted found, but beneath that was steel. Purpose. How did you survive? He asked. Clara hesitated. Then she sat slowly, as if the memory itself carried weight. I was sold to a rancher out near Carson City. He and his wife couldn't have children. They treated me like a hired hand, not a daughter. I mucked stalls and scrubbed floors. I wasn't allowed to speak about where I came from, she paused. They told people I was their niece. Said my parents had died in a fire. That I was lucky to be with them. Elias's jaw clenched. I believed it for a while, Clara continued. Then one night when I was 12, I heard them arguing. The wife wanted to send me away and said I was getting too curious. That's when I found out they paid for me. Paid Miriam. She stared at her hands for a moment. I ran the next morning. Spent the next decade bouncing between shelters, halfway houses, old mission towns. Then one day I found Caleb Boone. Elias blinked. You met him, Clara nodded. He was living out in the hills near Red Bluff. Alone. Sick. But I'm still writing. Still recording. He knew everything. I remembered everyone. He called it his punishment and said if he couldn't stop it back then, the least he could do was make sure the truth didn't die with him. She looked back toward the box, her voice quieter now. He gave me all this. Told me to find the rest. Told me to finish what he couldn't. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Elias spoke. Clara, why come back now? She looked at him really. And for the first time he saw it, not just grief or anger, but hope, raw and dangerous. Because Caleb's final journal mentions a new site, a new shipment. 23 kids. Still alive. Set to be moved soon. Elias's heart skipped. You think it's still going on? Clara leaned in, fire returning to her eyes. I know it is. I've tracked routes. I've seen missing persons reports that never get followed up. I've spoken to parents who were told their kids wandered off. They didn't. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a newer map drawn over Caleb's original. This is what they've built now, she said. Smaller operations, hidden in transport routes, mining towns, places with no oversight, places just like Sundown County. Elias studied the map. One location was circled in red just north of town. Ridgepoint Holding Facility. What is it? He asked. A way station, Clara said. Kids are taken there first, kept hidden until they're loaded into transport wagons. Caleb said it's run by someone Miriam trusted. She paused. Sheriff Roy Hammond. Elias stepped back. You're saying the sheriff is involved. He's not just involved. He's making it possible. Elias's pulse kicked into a sprint. This is bigger than her. Bigger than the orphanage. Clara nodded. It's always been bigger. He looked back down at the documents, the photos, the faces. This has to stop, he said. It will, Clara replied. But not if we go to the authorities. They're in on it. We need someone outside the system who... Oh, she handed him a sealed envelope. Father Thomas Mallory. He knew Caleb. He helped hide the original records. If anyone knows where the rest of Caleb's files are, it's him. Elias took the envelope. It was addressed in Caleb's handwriting. Clara stood. I'll meet you at Mallory's chapel in the morning. Go alone. And don't bring the journal. Not yet. Elias opened the door for her. She paused before stepping out. Miriam doesn't need guards, she said. She has men in uniforms. Men in robes. Men with titles. Then she looked back one last time. But she doesn't have Caleb. And she doesn't have me. With that, Clara disappeared into the night, leaving only her words behind. Elias seeks out Father Mallory, uncovering a long-buried alliance between Caleb and the priest, and the location of the missing grave map that will blow the case wide open. He wrote down every child's name, so the world would never forget them. The chapel stood at the edge of Sundown County, where the desert cracked open into dry hills and silence. Elias parked his wagon outside the rusted iron gate and stared up at the sagging steeple. The paint had long peeled away. Weeds pushed through the stone steps. The bell no longer rang. But someone still lived here. He stepped inside the sanctuary and found it dimly lit by dusty beams of morning sunlight cutting through stained glass. Pews sat in crooked rows like old bones, and at the front, beneath a faded crucifix, stood a man in black. Father Mallory, Elias asked. The old priest turned slowly. His shoulders stooped beneath the weight of time, but his eyes were sharp, watchful. You must be Elias Grant, he said, voice hoarse but clear. Elias nodded. Clara sent me. Mallory looked him over, then motioned toward the front pew. Sit. If she trusts you enough to send you here, you've already seen too much. Elias sat down uneasy beneath the watchful eyes of saints in glass. She said you knew Caleb Boone. I did. Mallory lowered himself slowly onto the pew beside him. He buried truths no man should have had to carry. And when no one would listen, he wrote them down. Every child. Every transfer, every lie the world wanted to forget. He wrote it all in the journal, Elias said. Clara has it. Mallory nodded. That's only one piece. Elias frowned. There's more. The priest leaned forward, lowering his voice. Caleb kept backups, not just for the journal, but for the documents that could prove everything. Copies of invoices, payment ledgers, even signed confessions. He knew that one day someone like you might come looking. Elias looked around the chapel, the cracked altar, the rotting hymnals. You're telling me those records are here? Mallory gave a thin smile. Not here, but close. There's a place he and I used when we needed to hide things from prying eyes. The county cemetery. Elias blinked. You hid documents. In a graveyard. Not in the graves, Mallory said. Under the old caretaker's shed. It was abandoned even then. We stashed the files in a lockbox beneath the floorboards. The thought made Elias's pulse quicken. If those documents were still there, they could expose not just Miriam Ashcroft, but the entire trafficking network. Why didn't you turn them in back then? Elias asked. Mallory's face darkened. We tried. The sheriff laughed us out of the room. The judge burned the first envelope we handed over. Said we'd be arrested for falsifying legal documents if we kept pushing. He looked down at his hands. Caleb lost everything. I kept the chapel, but only because I stopped asking questions. Elias exhaled slowly. Well, we're asking them again. Mallory stood, joints cracking. Then we best hurry. The graveyard was dead quiet. Elias and Mallory moved quickly through the rows of leaning headstones until they reached the back fence where the caretaker's shed leaned against a grove of scraggly trees. The door groaned open. Inside was nothing but rotted planks, cobwebs, and the scent of mold. Mallory knelt in the far corner and pried up a warped floorboard. Beneath it, a rusted lockbox covered in dust. Elias helped him lift it out and set it on an overturned bucket. Mallory unlocked it with a brass key from around his neck. Inside was a trove, folders labeled by year, bundles of letters, a leather-bound notebook filled with payment records, and in the center, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a stack of photographs, children again. Some laughing, some haunted. One had a date scrawled on the back in Caleb's hand, 2 days before Ridgepoint transfer, 1874. Elias stared at the faces. These are the 23 kids Clara was talking about. Mallory nodded. That was his last big entry. He said if anything happened to him, this would be the key to stopping the final route. Elias rifled through the folders until he found one labeled Transportation Routes. Inside, detailed maps, hand-drawn schedules, descriptions of wagons, pass codes, even the names of the foremen at each stop. One name jumped out. Sheriff Roy Hammond, clearance confirmed. Elias's blood ran cold. Mallory closed the box. It's all here, son, but it's only useful if you survive long enough to use it. They left the shed quickly, careful not to be seen. As they reached the fence line, Elias asked, "Why now? Why tell me all this?" Mallory looked up at the broken chapel steeple in the distance. Because I'm tired of watching graves fill while cowards pretend it's someone else's problem. Elias nodded. Then let's end it. Back at St. Eliza's, Clara was waiting in the office, arms crossed. You found it, she asked the moment Elias stepped inside. He set the lockbox on the desk. Clara opened it and went still. Her hand hovered over a particular file, one labeled Mayfield Children Unconfirmed Fate. She opened it and pulled out a photograph. Her fingers trembled. That's Thomas, she whispered. He was 9. Elias saw the same boy from earlier now in a new photo this time, with a stitched forehead and bruises on his cheek. He fought back, Clara said quietly. They punished him. She didn't cry. She didn't speak again for a long moment. Finally, she looked at Elias. This changes everything. He nodded. It proves the kids weren't just disappearing. They were being used, traded, and killed. Clara pulled out another file, this one with Caleb's familiar handwriting. Inside, a list of current locations, one circled in red. New facility 50 miles north Ridgepoint hold site. Inventory 23 children. Next transport, October 15th. That's in 4 days, Elias said. Clara closed the file slowly. Then we have 4 days to burn it down. They both turned as footsteps echoed from the hallway. Not heavy, not threatening, soft, hesitant. A woman stepped into the room. Dark skin, gray curls tucked under a worn head wrap. Her apron was stained with age. Elias stood confused. Clara blinked, stunned. Rosa May. The woman nodded, eyes heavy with secrets. You're not the only ones who remember, Rosa May Carter said. And it's time I stopped being quiet. Rosa May reveals the hidden movements inside the orphanage kitchen, where the first signs of the trafficking operation took root and where not all children vanished willingly. God turned his face when they came for the children. Rosa May Carter's voice was low, raspy, like dust dragged across old wood. She stood just inside the orphanage's office, her hands clasped tightly around the frayed apron that had once fed dozens of children. Clara stared at her like she was seeing a ghost. I thought you were gone. I tried to be, Rosa said. But the dead don't let you rest when their names are still buried. She stepped further into the room, her eyes scanning the walls with a distant ache. I cooked in that kitchen for 14 years. I held babies no one claimed. I taught girls how to bake bread and boys how to stir stew. I thought I was saving them, but I was just fattening them up for shipment. Elias sat on the edge of the desk, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. You knew what was happening. I didn't not. At first, Rosa said, shaking her head. Miss Ashcroft told us we were preparing children for better lives. Said the ones who left were going to families out west, places with land love God. She paused. But children don't vanish in the middle of the night when they're headed toward love. She lowered herself into a chair with a soft grunt and looked directly at Elias. You want to know where it started? Follow the kitchen. Everything moved through my pantry. Clara stepped closer, cautious. The food shipments. No baby, Rosa said. The empty crates. The false bottom barrels. We had a separate door for deliveries never used by staff. Just me and one other woman. Lucinda. She's gone now. Died 10 years back. But she knew. I think it broke her. Elias pulled out the map from Caleb's lockbox and unfolded it on the desk. Can you show us? Rosa nodded and pointed to the side entrance near the back garden. That one. Never locked. They'd come in after dark. Sometimes men in uniforms, sometimes just wagons with no drivers shown. I'd hear the steps. Little ones. Bare feet. Then silence. Clara's jaw clenched. Did you ever see where they went? Rosa hesitated. Once. Just once. The room fell silent. I couldn't sleep, she said. The wind was loud, and I kept hearing something like crying, so I followed the sound. I stayed low, crept through the back hallway. I saw them line up 8 kids ages no more than 10. One was barefoot. Another wore her nightgown. She swallowed hard. Miss Ashcroft stood there with a clipboard. Checked each one, nodded to the driver. No one cried. That's what got me. They just stood there, like they knew, like they'd already learned there was no use in screaming. Clara pressed a fist to her mouth. Rosa continued. After that night, I left a mark on the pantry door every time I heard the deliveries. Little scratches, like notches on a tree. I stopped counting after 49. Elias leaned over the map. Did Caleb know about the kitchen? He knew everything, Rosa said. He was the only man who came back after hours. He'd fix the fences, trim the weeds, but sometimes he just walked the halls. Said he was listening for what got left behind. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny tin whistle. Found this under the pantry shelf. Belonged to a boy named Ernest. He was mute, but he loved this thing. Blew it every morning until one day it just sat there, alone. Clara took it gently from her hand. We'll make sure his name isn't forgotten. A sudden knock at the front door made all 3 freeze. Elias stood slowly. Stay here. He opened the door with a cautious hand. A young man stood on the porch, hat in his hands. He looked no older than 20, nerves fraying at the edge of his expression. "Mr. Grant?" he asked. "Yes." The man looked over his shoulder before stepping closer. "I'm Nate Holloway." "Deputy, Sheriff Hammond doesn't know I'm here." Elias didn't move. "I don't want trouble," Nate said quickly. "But I think I've been helping to cover up something really bad." Elias opened the door wider and nodded toward the office. Clara raised her brow as Nate entered. He swallowed hard when he saw the files on the desk, the map, the photos. "Is all this real?" he asked. Clara answered first. "It's worse than you think." Nate ran a hand through his hair. "I thought the sheriff was just keeping order. He said people were poking around where they didn't belong. But this..." He picked up a document and an invoice with names blacked out. "This is human trafficking." Rosa nodded. "You know the Ridgepoint site?" Nate's eyes widened. "That's just a storage facility. For tools. Mining equipment," No Elias said. "It's a holding pen. 23 kids are scheduled to be moved in 3 days." Nate sat down hard. "God." Clara placed a hand on the file. "We need help getting in." Quietly. "If we go through official channels, Hammond will shut it down before we get there." Nate looked up at her, conflicted. "You think I can stop him? I'm just one deputy." Elias leaned in. So was Caleb, and he documented everything. Nate hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'll get you in. I know the back road. It's only guarded at night. But once we're inside..." "We'll find the kids," Clara said. Nate stood. "I'll leave first. If Hammond sees me with you, he'll know. Be ready tomorrow night. Bring proof." As he walked out, Rosa looked at Elias. "You'd better be sure," she said. "Men like Hammond don't go down easy." "I'm not here to go easy," Elias replied. Clara closed the files and looked at Elias. "We leave tomorrow. We get in, we get the kids out, and we end this." Elias nodded. Rosa stood and walked to the doorway, her eyes lingering on the hallway one last time. "God turned his face when they came for the children," she said. "You make sure he sees them now." Elias, Clara, and Nate plan the infiltration of Ridgepoint and discover someone is already watching them from the shadows. I kept their secrets because I was too afraid of being next. The kitchen was still. Dust hung in the air, catching sunlight through the high windows like tiny ghosts. Elias stood in the doorway, watching Rosa May's silhouette move slowly past rusted pans and long-dead stoves. The air smelled of iron, old wood, and the ghosts of meals that once filled bellies about to be emptied by the world. "This is where it started," Rosa said, "where it all moved through." Clara followed behind, her notebook in hand, eyes scanning every inch of the room as if the walls might still whisper. "The pantry had a false wall," Rosa continued. "That's how they did it." She walked toward the back corner of the kitchen and tapped the wooden panel behind a row of empty shelves. Elias knelt beside her and ran his fingers along the edge. The panel shifted slightly. With a creak and a crack, it popped free. Behind it, a narrow passage barely wide enough for a child. "The crates came through here," Rosa said. "Big ones. It looked like flour barrels on the outside. But they were hollow. Some had kids inside. Some just had clothes, papers, fake birth records. Whatever they needed to sell the next story." Clara's jaw tightened. "How did no one ever ask questions?" "They did," Rosa said. "Some of us, quietly. But every time someone spoke up, they left. Not just the children, staff too. A nurse disappeared one night after catching one of the ledgers. A young man from town came to court. One of the teachers never came back from his last visit. She wiped her hands on her apron, then looked at them like she could still feel the blood. I kept their secrets because I was too afraid of being next. Elias stood holding the panel. You kept notes, didn't you? Rosa hesitated. Then she reached under the old cutting table and pulled out a tin box that had long since been camouflaged by grime and time. Inside, scraps of paper notes written on the backs of ration receipts, torn envelopes, flour sacks. She handed it to Elias. I didn't know who to give it to. Not until now. Clara thumbed through the scraps. Names, dates. John Henry disappeared after the storm. Maggie Nightcrate, crying. 3 boys removed before inspection. These match Caleb's logs, she whispered. It confirms everything. Rosa lowered herself into a chair, the years settling onto her shoulders again. You said the crates were taken out the side entrance, Elias asked. She nodded. Straight into unmarked wagons. Never came back full. Just empty. Clara stood, and the transport route led through the canyon. Right through the old mining pass, Rosa said. Easier to hide the tracks in the stone. Especially when no one's looking. Elias nodded. We'll follow the path tonight. Clara glanced out the window. Nate said guards rotate at dusk. That gives us a 2-hour window. We go in silence, Elias said. No confrontations. Get the kids. Get out. Then we expose everything. Rosa looked at them both. You won't get a second chance. Once they know you're coming, they'll burn every record. That's why we take the evidence now, Clara said. And we don't go back. Elias gathered the scraps into his coat. What about you? I'll be here, Rosa said softly. Someone has to hold this place together once you tear the lies out of it. Clara gave her a long, grateful look. I'll come back, she said. When this is over. Rosa smiled faintly. Make sure there's something left to come back to. As they stepped out of the kitchen and into the fading daylight, the air shifted, heavy, like watching something. Elias paused on the back steps, his hand resting on the wood. Then he saw it. Tracks in the dirt. Not from Rosa. Not theirs. Fresh. Boots. Deep. Pressed hard like someone had stood there a long while. Watching. Clara saw them too. They've been here. Elias's voice dropped. How long? Long enough to know we're coming, she said. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out Caleb's journal again, flipping to the final pages. The coded entries, the names, the hand-drawn map. Her finger hovered over one note. If they're watching, they already know. Maybe it's time we stop hiding too, she said. Elias looked back toward the house, then paced it. To the town. The sheriff's office. The church. The people still pretending not to know. He turned to Clara. We're going tonight. Clara nodded. Nate's expecting us near the old well at Ridgepoint. He said there's a back trail through the pines. They began walking. The road ahead was narrow and wound behind a ridge that led to the canyon. Dry grass brushed against their boots. The sun dipped low, turning the sky the color of rust and ash. Clara broke the silence. Rosa never left because she believed someone had to stay behind to remember. Elias glanced over. And you, I left because I had to survive. But remembering never stopped. A shadow moved in the trees ahead. They froze. Then Nate Holloway stepped out, hand-raised eyes scanning the trees. "You weren't followed?" he asked. "Only by ghosts," Elias said. Nate gave a grim smile. "Then let's not join them tonight." He led them down a steep trail that veered behind a row of collapsed mining carts. The Ridgepoint facility was just below, tucked between two stone cliffs hidden from the road. From above, it looked like a barn. From here, it looked like a prison. Two men stood near the front, armed, talking low. Nate pointed. "Back entrances to the right. One guard. Easy to distract." Clara reached for her knife. "We're not here to fight. We're here to free them." "Then we better move," Elias said, "before God turns his face again." The infiltration begins, but inside the Ridgepoint facility, Elias and Clara uncover a truth even more horrifying than they expected. Not all the children are strangers. We either stop them now or bury 23 more children. The night pressed in tight around them as Elias, Clara, and Deputy Nate Holloway crouched behind the crumbling edge of an old mine cart. The Ridgepoint facility lay just 50 yards ahead, lit only by a single flickering lantern hanging above the back entrance. The building looked harmless from a distance, like a storage barn tucked between two dead cliffs. But the silence surrounding it wasn't natural. It was waiting. "Guard shifts change every 4 hours," Nate whispered, pointing to a dirt path just past the barn. "Next rotation's not for another hour. We've got one man at the rear, maybe two out front." Clara checked the knife strapped to her thigh. "We go in fast, quiet through the back. No confrontations unless we have to." Elias nodded. His chest was tight with the kind of anticipation that bordered on fear, but fear wouldn't help them tonight. "What about the kids? Do we know where they're being held?" Nate swallowed. "There's a room in the lower level, locked. Iron door. I've never seen inside it, but I've heard the crying." That was enough. Clara moved first low to the ground, skirting the side of the ridge wall, until she reached the barn's rear corner. Elias and Nate followed silently, boots brushing dirt and gravel. The guard stood by the back entrance, leaning on his rifle and half asleep. Clara crept up behind him, and with practiced ease struck him across the back of the head with the hilt of her blade. He dropped like a stone. Elias caught his rifle before it hit the ground. They slipped inside. The interior of the building smelled of oil and mold, and the wooden beams above them groaned with every gust of desert wind. Old mining tools hung on the walls. Barrels lined the room, each marked with the same red chalk number system they'd seen in the orphanage records. But no children. Not yet. Clara led them to a trap door near the back wall. Nate pulled it open, revealing a short flight of stairs carved into stone. Lanterns lit the descent with a sickly yellow glow. The air turned cold as they stepped down. The hallway below was narrow and damp, with rusted pipes along the ceiling and a single heavy door at the far end. From behind it, faint noises filtered through shuffling feet, soft sobs. Elias moved closer, heart in his throat. A small peephole in the door gave them a view inside. There they were. Children, maybe 20, maybe more, lying on thin mats in a bare concrete room. No blankets. No light except what filtered through the cracks in the ceiling. Some were awake, eyes hollow. Others curled into themselves, unmoving. Clara whispered, "We either stop them now or bury 23 more children." Nate knelt beside the door and pulled out a ring of keys. His hand shook as he sorted through them. "If these don't work, they will." Elias said, his voice firmer than he felt. The third key turned. The lock gave way with a metallic click. Clara opened the door slowly. The children didn't move. Not at first. Then a small girl with matted blonde hair looked up. Her eyes were too big for her face, too empty for her age. "It's okay," Clara whispered. "We're here to take you home." Some didn't react. Others sat up confused, blinking at the light from the hallway. A boy near the back stood slowly. His lip was split, and one eye was swollen shut. He couldn't have been older than 9. "Are you real?" Elias knelt in front of him. "We're real. You're safe now." A single tear ran down the boy's cheek, and he nodded. That was when the shot rang out. The wall beside the door splintered. Elias shoved Clara to the ground just as another shot echoed through the corridor. Front guards heard us. Nate growled, slamming the door shut. "We're out of time." Clara turned to the children. "Get up, all of you now." Elias grabbed the youngest in his arms, a girl barely 5, and ushered the rest toward the stairs. Nate took the rear, covering them with the rifle. They emerged back into the barn to find 2 more guards charging through the front entrance. Clara didn't hesitate. She slammed a barrel into one of them, sending him crashing into a stack of crates. Nate tackled the second, pinning him down until Elias could disarm him. Screams echoed as the children spilled into the open night, barefoot and blinking under the stars. "Get them to the tree line," Elias shouted. They moved fast, staying low. The children herded like a flock of frightened birds toward the edge of the ridge. A whistle shrieked in the distance, sharp and unmistakable. Clara stopped dead. "That's not one of ours." Elias turned to Nate. "What is it?" Nate's face paled. "That's the sheriff's signal. Hammond's coming." Clara cursed under her breath. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they're on us." Elias looked around at the children, still shivering, still confused. "We can't run fast enough." "Then we stand," Clara said. "We hold them here." "No," Elias snapped. "That's what they expect." "We'll split. Clara takes half the kids east to the ravine. I'll take the rest back to the trail." "Nate, can you cover both directions?" "I'll try," he said. Clara hesitated. "You sure?" Elias met her eyes. "We didn't come this far to lose them now." She nodded once. Then she was gone, leading a group into the night. Elias turned to the remaining children. "Stay close to me. Don't look back." They moved quickly, ducking between boulders, the sound of horses closing in behind them. At the base of the ridge, he found an old mining cart path and pushed the kids along it. Gunfire cracked in the distance, but it was fading. They made it to the tree line. And then blessed silence. Clara emerged a few minutes later, blood on her sleeve, but her eyes fierce. "All accounted for," she said. They counted. 23 children, alive. Nate stumbled in last, limping dirt and blood on his uniform. "We need to move. The sheriff's men will regroup. If we want this to go public, we need the journal, and we need the marshal." Elias nodded, every breath heavy in his chest. "Then we go back." "Back," Clara blinked. He looked at them both. "To St. Eliza's." "We finish what Caleb started." As they return to the orphanage, Elias and Clara discover someone has already beaten them there, and the journal may not be as safe as they thought. They knew the truth was here, and they came to erase it. The sun hadn't yet broken over the ridge when Elias, Clara, and Nate returned to St. Eliza's. The dirt road shimmered with mist, the quiet only broken by the muffled sound of boots and the tired breath of children clinging to one another. Clara's heart pounded as the orphanage came into view, still and silent in the dawn light. The windows stared blankly back at them. No smoke curled from the chimney. No birds sang from the broken rooftop. "Something's wrong," Elias said. Nate raised his rifle. "No one should have gotten here before us. I took the long trail to throw them off. Clara moved fast, pushing through the front doors, her boots echoing across the warped floorboards. The office door hung ajar, and the sour scent of scorched paper hit her before she even stepped inside. God, she whispered. The files were gone. The lockbox Caleb had left, the maps, the scraps of Rosa's notes, all of it. Ashes smoldered in the fireplace, faint curls of smoke whispering up the flue. Elias came in behind her. They knew. Clara turned slowly. Her eyes locked on the small table near the window. It had been flipped, and on it scrawled in red chalk, the same kind used to number the barrels, was a single word: silence. Nate cursed under his breath. They knew the truth was here, and they came to erase it. Clara ran a hand through her hair, jaw clenched. They must have come while we were at Ridgepoint. Elias stepped carefully into the center of the room, scanning the corners. Rosa, no answer. Clara called again, louder this time. Rosa May. Silence. They searched the main floor, the kitchen, and the pantry. The scratch marks Rosa had left on the pantry door were still there, but fresh boot prints now overlaid them, leading deeper into the orphanage, down the hallway, toward the chapel. They found her there. Rosa May was seated in the front pew, back straight, head bowed slightly, as if in prayer. But when Elias approached, he saw the bruises on her temple, the dried blood at her neckline. Clara's breath hitched. She dropped to her knees beside the woman who had once fed her, hidden her, remembered her. No, Clara said, voice cracking. Not her. She didn't deserve this. Elias checked for a pulse. Gone. In Rosa's lap sat the tin whistle, the one that had belonged to Ernest, the mute boy. She'd held it to the end. Clara took it gently, hands trembling. She stayed, she whispered. She always stayed. Nate stood at the edge of the pews, fists clenched. We should have brought her with us. We would have led them right to her, Elias said. They were watching the whole time. She bought us time. That's what this was. Clara wiped her eyes and stood. Then we use it. But everything's gone, Nate said. The proof. Not all of it, Clara interrupted. The journal. I took it with me to Ridgepoint. It's in my saddlebag. She turned and ran back toward the front steps. Elias and Nate followed, hope flickering like the first hints of sunrise. But when Clara opened the saddlebag, her hands froze. The journal was gone. Clara stared into the empty pack like it might reappear. No. No, no, no. She tore through the other bags, dumping out papers, tools, even her knife. Nothing. Elias stepped back. Someone took it. During the raid. But how I never let it out of my sight. They didn't need to take it while we were looking. Nate said grimly. They just needed a moment. A distraction. Elias ran his hands through his hair. Without that journal, we have no names, no dates. No link between Miriam and Ridgepoint. No chain of evidence. Clara stood slowly, her expression hardening. We still have the children. We still have the guards we knocked out. And we still have Nate. Nate gave her a look. Testimony won't be enough. Hammond controls the judge, the marshals, even the press. He'll call us radicals, thieves, say we kidnapped those kids. Elias turned toward the chapel again. We need a new plan. We can't fight this war in the shadows anymore. Clara looked at him. Then we bring it into the light. Nate raised a brow. How Elias stepped forward. We go public, not just to the courts, but the people, the surrounding towns, the parents, the churches, anyone who will listen. We don't just accuse, we show them what's been hidden. Clara's eyes narrowed. You're talking about exposure. Elias nodded. A full reckoning. Nate shook his head. We won't survive that. Hammond will come after you first. I don't plan to survive it, Elias said. I plan to end it. He turned to Clara. You still know the preacher from Carson City? She nodded slowly. Father Abel, yeah. He was the first person I told about what happened to me. Then we start there. We gather everyone we can. We show them the children. We tell them the names. We make noise so loud, Hammond can't bury it. And the journal, Nate asked. Elias looked back toward Rose's chapel. If they stole it, they'll guard it. We'll get it back. Clara held the tin whistle in her hand, fingers wrapped tight. We owe her that. The sun was rising now, casting light across the scorched edges of the office, the pews, the empty cradle of St. Eliza's soul. Elias stood at the doorway, staring out at the town, still wrapped in sleep. Let's wake them up. Elias and Clara traveled to Carson City to rally allies and uncover the final name hidden in Caleb's journal, a name that changes everything. The last name in the journal wasn't a child, it was one of us. The road to Carson City was long, dust-heavy, and quiet. Elias rode ahead, jaw-set eyes scanning the horizon. Clara rode just behind him, the wind tangling her hair, as she clutched the whistle Rosa had died protecting. Behind them, Nate Holloway guided a borrowed wagon carrying the 23 rescued children, each bundled in blankets, each too quiet for their age. They'd barely slept. Grief, adrenaline, and fury had kept them going. They arrived just after noon. Carson City was larger than sundown, with whitewashed churches, cobblestone roads, and storefronts that gleamed in the autumn sun. But beneath the shine, Elias sensed the same rot, the same silence. People moved quickly here. They didn't look strangers in the eye. Clara dismounted in front of the old mission church and crossed herself as she stepped inside. Father Abel stood near the altar, lighting candles with steady hands. He was a tall man with creased skin and a voice that could bend steel or soothe fire. When he turned and saw Clara, his eyes softened. Clara Jennings, I thought you were dead. She smiled faintly. Almost, but I came back. They embraced. Elias stood nearby, silent. Father Abel looked at him. You're the one who found the journal. Elias nodded. Caleb Boone's legacy, or what's left of it. Clara stepped forward. We need your help. We rescued 23 children from Ridgepoint. We have testimony, witnesses, but they burned our records. We're building a case from ash. Father Abel frowned. You're accusing Miriam Ashcroft and Sheriff Hammond more than accuse, Elias said. We're going to expose them. Abel hesitated. That's suicide. Clara's voice sharpened. No, it's justice. Abel studied her, then nodded slowly. You'll need more than God to make them fall. You'll need the court of public opinion and a crowd. Elias stepped closer. Can you give us that? Abel looked around the sanctuary. Give me one day. That night, Father Abel gathered 12 community leaders, including a school teacher, a doctor, and a blacksmith, whose niece had vanished 2 years prior. Elias and Clara spoke to them all, Clara recounting the horrors she'd lived through, Elias detailing what they'd uncovered. The room fell into silence when Nate spoke last. I served under Hammond, he said, voice tight. I saw transfers. Look the other way. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I was just following orders. He looked at the faces surrounding him. No more. One man stood slowly. If this is real, you'll need names. the ones they tried to erase. Clara turned to Elias. The journal. Caleb's entries weren't just records. There was a pattern. Codes. Elias nodded. I remember. The last page had initials, crossed out. Except one. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat, one he'd transcribed before the journal vanished. It was Caleb's final note, just a few scribbled words. The key isn't who disappeared, it's who stayed. Under it, a single name. Lawrence Ashcroft. Father Abel read it aloud, then went still. Clara looked confused. Ashcroft, as in her son, Abel said. Her firstborn. Elias leaned in. He's still alive, Abel nodded slowly. Most people think he died young, drowned. But I heard whispers over the years that he was kept hidden, groomed for what Nate asked. To run it, Elias said quietly. The whole network. Clara's stomach turned. The last name in the journal wasn't a child, it was one of us. Father Abel looked at Elias. If you want to expose them, you'll need Lawrence. He's the thread that unravels everything. Where is he? Abel hesitated. Rumors say he lives on the outskirts of Ashcroft's old land near the Black Hollow Hills. No one's seen him in years, but I know someone who might. He walked to a locked drawer behind the altar and pulled out a folded map and a brass key. Caleb used to visit a man named Fergus Shaw, reclusive but smart. He kept records. They called him the Shadow Scribe. If Lawrence is still out there, Fergus would know. Elias took the map. We'll ride at first light. Clara stepped forward. Will you keep the children safe here? Father Abel looked toward the back where the children now slept in borrowed beds and pews. Until my last breath. Outside, night fell hard and fast. Elias leaned against the hitching post, staring into the darkness beyond the town's edge. Clara joined him. If this leads where I think it leads, it will, Elias said. You ready to see the face of the system I've been staring at its shadow my whole life? It's time I saw its eyes. They stood in silence as the church bell rang midnight. Tomorrow they'll ride to Black Hollow, and if the boy who never died was still alive, they'd finally see how deep the roots of evil truly went. In the haunted terrain of Black Hollow, Elias and Clara confront the Shadow Scribe and uncover the location of Lawrence Ashcroft, setting the stage for a final reckoning. If you want to kill the roots, you've got to go where the rot began. The wind changed the moment they crossed into Black Hollow. It was colder here. The air was thick with pine and damp soil, and silence clung to everything like fog. The trees twisted, unnaturally gnarled from years of growing in poisoned earth. Elias felt it in his bones before he saw it. The heaviness, the stillness, the sense that this land remembered things it should have forgotten. Clara rode beside him, the reins tight in her hands. I hate this place. You been here before? Elias asked. She nodded slowly. Once, when I was a kid. Miss Ashcroft brought me and a few others out here to gather firewood. Told us this place belonged to the devil if we wandered too far. Elias looked around. I think she was trying to scare you off from finding whatever she buried out here. They reached the edge of a clearing. In the center stood a cabin built low and sunken into the hillside. Its roof sagged under moss and years, and a weathered cross hung sideways on the door. This is it, Elias said, dismounting. The door opened before he could knock. A man stood there, tall and rail-thin, dressed in a patched black coat. His hair was white, his beard long, and his eyes so sharp they seemed to cut through the air. He didn't speak at first, just stared at them, like he'd been expecting them all along. "You're here for Lawrence," the man said. "Fergus Shaw?" Elias asked. "I used to be the man," replied. "Now I'm just what's left of him." Clara stepped forward. "Father Abel said you kept records." Fergus nodded. "I kept everything. Names, ledgers, movements. You don't survive the machine unless you understand its gears." He opened the door wider and motioned them in. Inside, the cabin was dark and packed wall to wall with papers, books, jars of old ink, stacks of folded maps and coded ledgers. A single oil lamp burned on a narrow desk beside a rifle and a worn leather journal. Elias glanced at the chaos. "Is this all yours?" "Mine and Caleb Boone's," Fergus said. "He came often. Trusted me more than he trusted God." Clara looked around. "Then you know about the children?" Fergus nodded. "I knew before Caleb did, but I wasn't brave enough to stop it. Not then." Elias took a step forward. "We need to find Lawrence Ashcroft. You know where he is?" Fergus looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked to the back of the cabin, pulling open a chest beneath a stack of tattered blankets. He removed a folded map and a file marked with a red wax seal. "He doesn't use the Ashcroft name anymore," Fergus said. "Goes by Victor Lorne now. Lives in an estate about 2 miles northeast. No one's allowed in. Fenced, guarded. But make no mistake." He handed Elias the file. "That's him. The heir. The architect. Miriam's prize." Clara flipped through the file. Inside were photos of grainy black and white shots of a man in his 30s, sharp-suited, standing beside Miriam Ashcroft at a ribbon cutting for a rehabilitation center. Another photo showed him shaking hands with Sheriff Hammond. Elias gritted his teeth. "He's the root." Fergus nodded. "If you want to kill the roots, you've got to go where the rot began." Clara looked up. "Can we trust you?" Fergus smiled faintly. "I've kept the truth buried long enough. Time to start digging." Elias studied the map. "If we go tonight, can we make it?" "You'll want the northern ridge," Fergus said. "Less guarded. Quiet. But once you're in, there's no backing out." Clara finished. Fergus nodded. "You'll find a cellar door behind the greenhouse. That's how the shipments used to go out. It leads under the estate, into the heart of it." Elias tucked the map away. "Thank you." Fergus handed him one last item, a small silver locket. "This was Caleb's. He left it with me the last time I saw him." Clara opened it. Inside was a tiny faded photo of a baby. On the back, L.H. Lawrence, Elias murmured. "No," Fergus said. "The baby wasn't Lawrence. It was someone else." Clara's eyes widened. "Then who?" Fergus met her gaze. "You." The room fell into stunned silence. Clara staggered back, shaking her head. "That's not possible." "Caleb was your father," Fergus said softly. "He came here once with a baby girl. Told me he couldn't keep her safe while he was digging through hell. So he placed her in the orphanage, under another name." Clara's lips trembled. "He left me there." "He was trying to save you," Fergus said. "And he did. You lived. You saw. You remembered." Elias stepped forward. "Does Lawrence know?" "I don't think so," Fergus said. "But if he finds out, he'll try to erase you too, just like your father." Clara sat down, the locket tight in her hand. Elias crouched beside her. "This doesn't change the mission." She shook her head. "No, It makes it personal. Outside, thunder rolled low across the mountains. Elias stood. We go at dusk. Fergus gave him a long look. Don't die quietly, son. If this is the end, make it loud. Clara rose steadier now. We'll be louder than fire. As they stepped out into the evening light, Elias looked toward the distant ridge where the estate waited in shadows. Tomorrow they'd burn it all down. Elias and Clara infiltrate the estate and come face to face with Lawrence, whose revelation will tear open the final truth, justice, or revenge only one can survive. The moon hung low and heavy as Elias and Clara crouched at the edge of the estate's greenhouse, breath clouding in the chill night air. The silence of Black Hollow pressed in around them, broken only by the soft creak of wind through twisted trees. Clara held Caleb's locket tight in one hand, the other wrapped around the knife at her belt. Her heart beat not with fear, but with finality. It ends tonight. They slipped around the back boots, silent on the moss-covered path. Just where Fergus said it would be, they found the cellar doors, steel-rusted chained. Elias pulled a bolt cutter from his coat and sliced through the links in a single snap. The doors groaned as they opened, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. Clara looked at him. You sure know, Elias said, but I'm done running. They moved into the depths. The tunnel beneath the estate was colder than the outside air, lined with crates and shelves, stacked with forged documents, ration books, old ledgers, all stamped with the Ashcroft seal. Clara recognized the markings instantly. These were the tools of disappearance, the machinery of silence. At the end of the corridor, a single iron door. Beyond it, light and voices. Elias reached for the handle, but it opened before he touched it. Lawrence Ashcroft stood in the doorway, dressed in a gray wool suit, his dark hair slicked back, eyes too calm, like a man who believed he had already won. He smiled faintly. You found me. Clara stepped forward. You've been hiding for a long time, Victor. His smile faded. Ah. So Fergus talked. Not just Fergus, Elias said. We have everything. Witnesses, records, children who can speak. They won't live long. Lawrence said, voice icy. Once you're dealt with, this all ends. Elias drew his pistol. No. It begins. Lawrence didn't flinch. You think you're bringing justice? You're just replacing one lie with another. This world doesn't run on truth. It runs on control. You were a child once, Clara said, stepping closer. How did you become this? Lawrence tilted his head. I was never a child. My mother made sure of that. She made monsters out of all of us, Elias said. But we get to decide if we stay that way. Lawrence's hand went for the revolver at his hip. Clara was faster. The shot rang out through the stone corridor. Lawrence staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. He dropped to his knees. Elias stepped forward, gun still raised. But Clara moved past him and knelt beside Lawrence. She looked into the eyes of the man who had built a prison of innocence and profit, who had buried truth beneath a century of silence. You don't deserve mercy, she said. I don't want it, Lawrence rasped. But I won't become what you are, she said, standing. I won't make justice another name for revenge. Elias holstered his weapon. Sirens wailed in the distance. Father Abel had done his part. The world was coming. Clara turned back to Lawrence. You're going to live. You're going to stand trial. And everyone will hear the truth. He laughed weakly. Truth doesn't matter. Not in the end. It does to those who've suffered, Elias said. It does to those who survived. The trial took weeks. Under heavy guard, Lawrence Ashcroft was transported to the Capitol. Clara testified. So did Nate Holloway, the children from Ridgepoint, and even Fergus, who stepped out of the shadows to bring records that stunned the courtroom into silence. Miriam Ashcroft never appeared. Her health had mysteriously declined, and she died quietly in her estate before the trial concluded. But her legacy, her empire of control, burned under the weight of the truth. The Ashcroft Orphanage network was dismantled. Ridgepoint was condemned. Dozens of names once lost to fire and silence were restored. Graves marked, families reunited when possible, mourned when not. Elias stood on the steps of the courthouse the day the verdict came down, guilty on all counts. Life without parole. Clara stood beside him. They asked me to speak, she said, staring at the news vans lining the street. Are you going to? Elias asked. She nodded. Not for him, for Rosa, for Caleb, for every kid who didn't make it out. She stepped to the podium, the crowd growing silent. My name is Clara Jennings, she said. I was raised in a place built on lies. I lived among ghosts. I remember their names. She paused, her voice steady but raw. We were told to forget. We were punished for asking. But we asked anyway. We survived anyway. And now we speak anyway. Elias watched her pride rising in his chest like a tide. Months passed. The church in Carson City became a refuge not just for the children, but for others still healing, still fighting. Elias stayed on helping Father Abel run the shelter. Nate was appointed interim sheriff of Sundown. Fergus returned to Black Hollow, but not alone. Volunteers helped clear the land, turning it into a place of remembrance. Clara visited often, sometimes to speak, sometimes to listen. And one day she stood beside Elias on a hill overlooking what was once St. Eliza's. The building was gone, razed by time and fire, but in its place stood a stone marker. Simple, carved with the names of every child who had passed through its doors. I used to think silence was the only thing we were left with, Clara said softly. And now Elias asked. She smiled, eyes misty. Now I think we were left with the truth. And that's more dangerous than anything they built. They stood there, the wind whispering through the trees, carrying with it the voices of the past, no longer buried, no longer erased. And in that silence they found peace. Because the story didn't end in fire. It ended in light.